And the last thing about confusion is that obedience melts away confusion. There are three things we see Joseph do that tells us he's walking in obedience. Number one, he took Mary home as his wife like he was told to. Number two, he didn't consummate the marriage until after she gave birth, which means he was married to her and they didn't consummate the marriage at all until after Jesus was born. That's an act of obedience. Number three, he and Mary gave the baby the name they were instructed to give, Jesus. Can you imagine? God tells you to name your child something. What if you don't like the name? My wife came home with our fourth kid. We found out we were pregnant, and she was like, we're going to name her Zoe. And I was like, no, we're not. She's like, no. You got to name the first one because he's named after you, Carlos III. And you got to say so in number 2. And you got to say so in number 3. This one's mine. And she had that demonic voice, mine, this is mine. I was like, yes, ma'am. I didn't like the name Zoe because I just knew a couple girls named Zoe. Didn't like the name. My bad interactions, right? And a couple months went by, and we're researching the name, and we start praying about her name, and that Zoe means life. And God spoke to me and says, your daughter's going to bring life to you and to your wife and to your family. So we have the baby, Zoe, and she's amazing, and we love her. Her laugh, she hugs me more than anybody else in my life. She has to hug us every night. She brings so much life. And yet the first 3 years of her life brought a lot of death. She had 4 surgeries in 3 years. Yet God told us to name her life, and yet she's struggling for her life? How does that make sense? It's active obedience. And when we obey, God begins to shed light and our confusion begins to melt away. James 1:22. But don't just listen to God's word. You must do what it says. Otherwise, you are only fooling yourselves. For if you listen to the word and don't obey, it is like glancing at your face in a mirror. You see yourself, walk away, and forget what you look like. And here we have Joseph now in position to either do what is right in his own eyes, what he had already decided, or to truly rely on what God asked him to do. When we choose to do what is right in our own eyes, we start down a path that leads to sin, the very opposite of being with God. Sin is a separation from God. How do we know that? James 4, verse 13. Look here, you who say today or tomorrow we're going to a certain town and we'll stay there a year. Those of you who are planners, all you high J's who are planners. And we will do business there and make a profit. And how do you know what your life will be like tomorrow? Your life is like the morning fog. It's here a little while, then it's gone. Verse 15, what you ought to say is, if the Lord wants us to, we will live and do this or that. Otherwise, you are boasting about your own pretentious plans, and all such boasting is evil. Verse 17, remember, it is a sin to know what you ought to do, then not do it. So if Joseph would have disregarded the message, if Joseph would have disregarded the instructions given to him, he would have gone from being righteous and upstanding to a man living in sin, not doing what he knows is right. So what does it mean to be obedient? According to the story we just read, it means it's okay to acknowledge what we would prefer. Joseph was being honest. I would prefer not to be in this relationship. That's my preference. It's okay to acknowledge it. Line ourselves up to what is right. He had a preference. He lined himself up to what was right. Now, allowing God to speak to us in the dream was invaded and God began to speak to him. The fourth thing, understand the why. You can't really walk in obedience unless you understand the why. Why is God calling you to do this? And the last thing, no matter what it is, choose to obey.